Hello folks, this is Founder Leroon and this is Fantasy Grounds A through Z, and today we're going to cover encounters. Encounters are an integral part of Fantasy Grounds. These are how you set up groups of attacks or mobs or even just a single encounter. Normally use encounters to control the experience points, the challenge rating, also the types of encounters themselves. So first of all, I'm going to go over the basics. So here before you, I have all of the main windows and things that are going to be appropriate for the actual discussion. I have just the SRD rule set open. I don't have anything else really that fancy. If you click on the encounters button, you'll get this first window here. And then this button up here on the top left where it says random, that will pop up this window. And then for each data type, I have the wandering or random monsters, and then here's a blank entry. Down here are some notes on how to calculate CR level and XP. And then the party sheet is going to come into play when I actually start using the random encounters. We have a way and a formula to control them. So this is basically our attempts at trying to get all the different buttons covered with Fantasy Grounds A through Z. So when you click on the encounters button, you'll usually get this. It might be blank or it might be loaded with a bunch of different things depending on what rule set, what kind of content you have. When you make an encounter, it can be a couple different things. It can be a non-player character, it can be a monster, it could be a trap, or it could even be a vehicle. So that's how the 5th edition rule set sets up and treats things like that. So this is a blank entry here, and this is the way you create that is you click on this green plus button down here, and it will make something called new encounter or new random encounter. So we're going to worry about the encounter for now. So when you make an encounter, you have to have some kind of NPC. So I just clicked on the NPCs banner or button. I just clicked on the NPC banners or buttons, and I bring up the NPCs. I think I'm going to make a simple encounter with some bats. So I do that by single clicking and dragging the bats onto the new encounter. And here you have the bats are now part of this encounter, and it's only one bat at this point. So if you want to make more of them, you can change the number, and now there's 12 bats total. On the stat block itself, it contains all of the different aspects of the bat, including the base challenge rating and the base experience. So if you look on here, this experience of 10 and challenge rating 0. So when you hit the refresh button up here on the encounter itself, it will recalculate. Same thing with the CR. Once it's recalculated, you can see that now that it's worth 120 if you were able to defeat all 12 of these bats. So they're not really tough, but they scatter around and they swarm and stuff, so it might be a little difficult depending on what the situation is. Also, at this point, some of you might want to change the token. So a lot of you will probably attempt to change it at the NPC level, which you can do, but that actually permanently changes it for your campaign. So if you want to get around that, you can choose a token of your own. And if you go over to your assets, and you click on tokens, I'm actually looking for bats right now. It will take a while. So not really exactly what I was looking for, but here's a fruit bat. So as you can see, I can drag and drop this token and drag it up to this master token for the encounter. So rather than changing the button or the token for this base, I'm just going to change it for the encounter itself. And there's a preview of the token itself. And now that I've dragged that up, it is now the bats instead of just the letter B. So you can change it like that, or if you want to, you can change it at the level of the NPC. I don't recommend that. I recommend doing it at the encounter level, unless, of course, you're creating your own homebrew world and you have specific tokens for specific things. But just for a one-off encounter, I would just change it at the encounter level instead of the NPC. So the main thing to know is that NPCs build encounters. So instead of just these bats, how about we throw like a vampire or something on here? I can do a vampire spawn since they're a little bit less horrific. So again, I'm just going to drag it from the NPCs over to the encounter. And there's the vampire spawn with some bats. Now, once I've added to it, I can click on the CR refresh and the XP. Now that encounter goes from a CR1 to a CR6 because of the vampire spawn. Now, there's no way to really calculate your XP in Fantasy Grounds without having some sort of extension. So there's a couple websites that I have, or a few actually, that I've looked at. If you use D&D Beyond, if you're an owner or if you have content there, you have access to a beta build for an encounter builder. So if you use this, you'll see there is an encounter that you can build here, and I can almost emulate what I've done now. So let me see if I can do it. Yeah, I have a bunch of filters. So when you do this, you want to make sure it's unfiltered. And I just added 12 bats. Here are the vampires. Here's the vampire spawn. So I'm going to add the vampire spawn to this encounter. And now you have your summary over here on the right. It says adjusted XP is 5760. The difficulty level depends on the level of your party, but basically 1920 for total XP, and then it depends on if you want daily or... So that is just one example. You have Don John, which kind of does something similar, except it's not as sophisticated. You can set for a medium difficulty, party of 5. Let's say they're all 3rd level. Then you would say, okay, PC level 3, and these are your range of the types of monsters that you can use. So there's other ways to calculate. And one of the more popular ones is, here's for 5 players, level 3. And you can click on a random medium encounter, and then you have other filters that you can use. So these are tools for your games that you're going to use outside of Fantasy Grounds, because they don't really have one of these built in unless someone's developed some kind of third-party extension. So when you're creating NPCs to build encounters, you have to set those correctly in the NPC stat block. And that way this actually gets updated correctly. And there's our 1920 like it showed in D&D Beyond. So it seems to match there. It does kind of a similar thing, but it assumes that the CR levels and the XP are already set. Well, if you're building your own creatures from scratch, you're going to have to calculate your own. So those tools that I showed you online kind of helps you with that in a sense. So I'm going to go ahead and close the NPCs. Last time we did Fantasy Grounds A through Z, we did cover NPCs, so this kind of segues into it. So now you have an encounter here that is basically a vampire spawn and some bats. Now I call this encounter Vampiric Threat. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this here as a reminder. When you make things like this, you're going to either link them to a story entry if it comes up in a module, like if you're building something, or you can also pin it to a map. So I have some images here that I'm going to take a look at. So we'll just say this is our map per se, even though it's not. You can link these events or these items to a map. So if you pretend that this is our map, when you click on it, it will bring up the encounter. So you could pin these within story template areas or maps, or in the story elements. So that is how you would use these if you want to put them on a map or embed them into a story. That's link it by the by this up here. This is your shortcut. And then if you want to recall this later, you can also drag and drop it down to your hotkeys. So that way when I close it, I don't have to worry about where it went. I can find it again. Okay, so I'm going to move this out of the way for now. So that's your basic encounter. Now we have a thing called encounters random or random encounters. So I'm going to call this Vampiric Guardians. I'm even going to take the same creatures and just put them on this other encounter. So all I did was drag them over. So I'm only going to have one vampire spawn because I don't want too many. And I can set the bats at 1d8 or whatever die rolls you want. Once I lock this, it's going to output it to a basic encounter like we have over to the left. And this time it rolled a 3 on a 1d8. So I got 3 bats and 1 vampire spawn. So no matter what, we're always going to have this 1 vampire spawn. The only variation is in the bats. Now let's just say these might have been goblins or whatever. You can change the way that this behaves based off the party sheet. And that's why I have the party sheet up. So if you wanted to control or at least have a good idea of how strong the encounter might be, you can kind of control it. And the reason you would do this is for replay value. So if you play the module 50 times and it's not going to be the same with different amounts of people. So this actually keeps in mind the amount of people, this method. So right now, if I hit generate, it's just going to generate, a random roll depending on the die that I put in the number here. So if I want to control it based off the party sheet, I can unlock the actual encounter and replace the 1d8 with some syntax. The syntax is $PC, uppercase. So depending on what I do is how I'm going to write this formula. So I have 5 or 6 players. I want double the amount of bats than there are players. A 2 asterisk PC should give me 10 bats and then the 1 spawn. There we go. So that's based off the number of characters in the party sheet. It doesn't calculate their level or anything like that. It's just the number of PCs. It has nothing to do with the combat tracker. It's to do with how many group members are in your party. So if I wanted to, I could also say 1.5 times, the number of PCs. Or I can say 1 plus the number of PCs, or the number of PCs minus 1. So I hit generate, it should give me 4 bats. And it did. So it's kind of a random number, but it's more based off the number of people in your party. So that helps you control the encounters so that, so you know what's going to happen, or you know how many are going to come up depending on the level of the party and the expected level of the encounter. So you kind of have to know how encounters are, how strong they are and such before you do something like this. Because you're only basing it off the party number, not the mix of levels and such. So if you have a mixed level of party members, then you're going to have a different amount of challenges in there So this wouldn't be very effective then. You'd have to kind of rethink it. It does take dice rolls. So 1d4. So you could say 1d4 times the number of PCs. Yep, there's 10. There's 15. So it does work. Let's try one more for good measure. Yeah, there's another 15. There's 5. So it's working. So it just depends on the die roll. So basically, that's your bread and butter there for encounters. To balance them, you need to understand CR level and challenge rating. Those are one and the same. And then you also need to understand the experience points. So if you use the tools that I had showed you earlier, either use the D&D Beyond Encounter Builder or the Fight Club Encounter Builder or even the Encounter Size tool on the Donjon website, those are good starting points because Fantasy Grounds doesn't have that built into it. Also, when you're putting together these encounters, you want to make them smaller. So this size here would probably be about the largest I would do. To be honest, if you have too many things on the combat tracker, it's really going to slow things down. So right now, here's my party members. They're on the combat tracker. So here's one of the encounters that I rolled. So now you can see I have a bunch of encounters or a bunch of creatures. So what happens is you're going to be scrolling up and down on this thing all day, all night. And it's going to take a long time to get through those turns. So what I would do is break that encounter up in half. I would probably put the vampire spawn separate, and then I would have 2 waves of bats. That way they can stagger, and you can bring them in as needed instead of one huge encounter. That's just way too much stuff to deal with at once. So I would maybe do like 3 or 4 rounds, and then introduce another group or something like that to thin some of the creatures out before you keep adding to it. It also helps control the flow of battle a little bit, but sometimes you can't help it. There's just the way it is. But in most cases, if you're the game master and you have control of the table, you should be able to manage that. So I usually break the encounters up if they're that big. Anything more than 10 is too big. So if you have 10 things, that's way too many things at once generally. So break it up into like 2 encounters instead of one big thick one. And that'll help you with your combat tracker, so you're not weighing through all those turns and trying to keep this from scrolling up and down, because that's what you're going to be doing all night and all day if you have 2 large of encounters. If it ends up with a negative number, would that just be 0? Yeah, it rounds down. So if you have a weird number like if you divide it in half and it's an uneven number in the party, it will round it down to 0, and it will only show 1 or 0 in that case. So it'd probably just show 1 if it was 0. So if you had 3 and it was 1.5, then it would just round it down to 1. Even though it says 1.5, you can just manually adjust it, and it will only count as 1. So yes, that's one of the things that you can do. Case in point, let's check that out. So again, using the formula, I'm going to encounters, and all the encounters that I made earlier with that formula are now stored in this group. So keep that in mind. So now I'm in the random encounters area. So I want to go the number of PCs divided by 3. So it's $PC with a right or /3. So that's your division. So now when I hit generate, it should be, half, like 2.5 or something like that. But it will round the actual monsters down to the lowest number. Yeah, so in this case, it said 16 bats because I did divided by 3. So it says 66666, but you can't have that, that many in there, 16.6. So it's kind of goofy in that regard. So we have to change that syntax. So the number of PCs divided by 0.3. There again, it's 66.6666. But what it will do is it will actually it will recalculate. It'll recalculate. So let me try the number of PCs divided by 0.3. Okay, so there's your 2.5. It only shows 2. So then in here, you would just unlock it, change it to 2. So it rounds it down regardless of what it comes up with. You can divide and add, and you could go like 1.5 or whatever. So it's just kind of up to you how you want to do it. But it does do the math. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit. I think 0 would probably be round to 1. I don't think it could go any less than 1. But I could be wrong. Just a matter of how it's built into the rule set. So I think that's what I'm going to cover for today as far as encounters. If you guys have any questions about them, or if you think you missed out on something, this will be up on YouTube. I have another couple minutes, so if you guys want to answer or ask any questions or make any comments, go ahead and do so. Today we are focusing just on the encounter button. I illustrated where it is, the 2 different types of encounter. So one would be more like a generic encounter. The other was more like a random encounter, or you can control it. We also kind of went over some tools to use to calculate encounters in case you need a special encounter calculated. There's also the fact that you can pin encounters on maps or within the story entry, and you can also link them together with different encounters. But one thing I forgot to show you was when you're done with an encounter and you're on the experience point sheet, I'm going to take this encounter and award it to the party. So I've dropped that encounter into this back sheet on the tab. The tab is called XP. So I went ahead and just dropped that in there. And now when I click award, anybody that was on the combat tracker so everybody in this group got 365 experience. And it shows up here on the top as well. It shows who got the experience. So it's just, you build the encounter or you use the existing ones, or you can control how many you want with that formula. So the formula again is it's $, capital P, capital C. And usually I put the negative numbers to the right of the formula and the positive numbers to the left. So if I go 2 plus the number of PCs or 2 times, and then on the other half it'd be like divided by 2 or subtract 2 from the, or minus 2. So that's how I usually do it. You can also put die rolls in there. It's just a matter of taste and time and how much you want to get out of it. So hopefully that helps you guys. I think next week, let's see, we will be talking about probably backgrounds or one of these other buttons. I'm not sure yet, but we've covered a lot of the major ones like notes and images and tables and such. So we're getting close to the end of the series. We probably got maybe tops another 10 videos maximum, and then I'll probably start over and probably work in reverse. I'll probably go start with like maps and images and work my way back. So it may just be a continuous thing, since we have a cycle of continuous people joining. So maybe I'll just keep it going. But always looking for content. If you guys know other rule sets really well and you want to provide something for us like this, let us know, because we always want content, especially if it's non-5e. We definitely want that. Not enough people step up to actually show us how that's done. So if you're one of those individuals out there and you have some videos or you have time to film those, please send those over. If we'd like to include those in our events, or if you don't want that, then maybe you can make your own channel and just let us know and we'll link to it. So hopefully that helps you guys. This month coming up, we're going to have the DCC rule set featured, which is going to be the Dungeon Crawl Classics and Goodman Games. We have a pretty good lineup starting up on that already. And then we're going to be giving out prizes, have a symposium. Last month we did D&D Classic, and the month before that we did Traveler. And back in November, I believe, we ran a Pathfinder 1 series. So it's coming along. We're kind of getting a good momentum on it. And it kind of gives people a chance to check out what other rule sets can do other than just 5th edition. But 5th edition is what we normally show and teach, because that's what most of us have for content. So anyways, take care, everybody, and hopefully you will be well educated by the time this series is over. If you like what we're doing here, join our Discord. It'll be in the links and such associated with these social media channels. And if you believe in what we're doing, we have a patron supporter thing, and it's Patreon/FGC, or you can just come in the community. There's a donation area in there. Also, I want to thank all of the volunteers in Fantasy Grounds College and all of you for showing up and supporting us. I really appreciate it. You guys have a good